The distant wail of coyotes pierced the night as Hannah Owens fought to stay conscious, her body burning with a fever that threatened to steal her last breath. The abandoned homestead creaked. Around her, a pitiful shelter from the harsh spring of 1873 in the Oregon Territory. She had never imagined her journey west would end like this, alone, delirious, and slowly dying on a dusty floor with only the harsh howl of the wind for company. Hannah had left Philadelphia with dreams of building a new life, escaping the memories of her late father's gambling debts and the unwanted advances of his creditors. At 23, she had possessed nothing but a small inheritance from her mother, a teacher's credentials, and the stubborn determination that had always been both her greatest strength and her downfall. The stagecoach had been attacked 3 days prior. Bandits, her fellow passengers, shot or scattered. Hannah had fled, wandering aimlessly, until she stumbled upon this abandoned homestead, its previous occupants long gone victims of harsh winters, failed crops, or perhaps the same lawlessness that had left Hannah stranded. The fever had taken hold. Quickly, a wound on her arm from her desperate escape through brambles had festered, angry red lines now streaking toward her heart. Each breath came harder than the last. Her lips cracked from dehydration despite the water she'd found in an old rain barrel. "If anyone can hear me," she whispered to the empty room, "please help." The words dissolved into a fit of coughing that racked her slender frame. The last thought before darkness claimed her was that no one would even know where to send her body. Preston Edwards pulled his hat lower against the driving rain, cursing his decision to take the northern trail back to his ranch. The 28-year-old cowboy had been in Portland delivering cattle when the storm hit, forcing him to seek shelter for the night. His horse, Thunderbolt, nickered nervously as lightning split the sky, illuminating the outline of a dilapidated homestead in the distance. "Just a little further, boy," Preston murmured, patting the horse's neck. "Then we'll get dry." He hadn't expected to find anyone in the abandoned Miller place. The family had succumbed to typhoid the previous winter, all except the youngest son, who'd been taken in by relatives back east. So when Preston pushed open the door, water streaming from his duster, the sight of a woman lying motionless on the floor stopped him cold. "Madam," he called, approaching cautiously. In these parts, caution kept a man alive. "You all right?" No response. Preston knelt beside her, noticing immediately the unnatural flush of her cheeks against otherwise pallid skin. He placed a calloused hand against her forehead and drew back at the scorching heat. "Fever," he muttered. "Bad one." Survival on the frontier demanded practicality. The sensible choice would be to leave her, continue on to his ranch, and perhaps send the doctor when the storm passed. A stranger's troubles weren't his burden. Yet something about her face, peaceful despite the fever's grip, stirred something long dormant in Preston. 3 years as a widower had hardened him against sentimentality, but he couldn't leave her to die alone. Preston built a fire in the old hearth, thankful that the roof remained mostly intact despite the homestead's neglect. He removed his wet coat and hat, hanging them near the flames before returning to the unconscious woman. "Miss, can you hear me?" He shook her gently, receiving only a faint moan in response. Her dress was damp with sweat, her chestnut hair tangled and stuck to her neck. With careful hands, Preston rolled up her sleeve to discover the source of the infection, an ugly, inflamed gash that needed immediate attention. "You're in a bad way, miss," he said, though he doubted she could hear him. "But you're not dying tonight. Not if I can help it." Preston had learned medicine the hard way through necessity. Life on a cattle ranch offered plenty of opportunities to treat injuries, both human and animal. From a saddlebag, he retrieved a small tin of salve made from euro and comfrey, carefully applied it to the wound, then bandaged it with a clean cloth torn from a spare shirt. Next came the battle against the fever. Preston retrieved water from his canteen, gently lifting Hannah's head to help her drink. Most dribbled down her chin, but some made it past her parched lips. He then soaked his handkerchief and placed it on her forehead, refreshing it whenever it grew warm from her skin. "You're a fighter," Preston observed as she unconsciously turned toward the coolness of the cloth. "That's good. You'll need that spirit." Through the long night, Preston tended to her, replacing the wet cloth, coaxing small sips of water, and speaking in low, reassuring tones whenever she grew restless. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, a quiet battle was being waged against death itself. Dawn broke with tentative rays of sunlight filtering through the homestead's dirty windows. The rain had stopped, but the woman's fever remained. Preston had dozed briefly, sitting against the wall near her, and awoke with a start when he heard change in her breathing. Her eyes were open, though unfocused. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Safe," Preston replied, moving to her side. "You're at the old Miller homestead. I found you last night with a nasty fever." Hannah tried to sit up, panic flashing across her features, but fell back with a groan. "Easy now," Preston cautioned. "You're still mighty sick. That arm of yours is infected something terrible." "Who are you?" She managed to focus on his face, the sharp angles softened by kind blue eyes and several days' worth of stubble. "Preston Edwards. I ranch about 15 miles south of here." Hannah closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "Hannah Owens. I was on the stagecoach to Portland when bandits attacked." Her voice cracked. "Everyone else. I don't know if anyone survived." Preston nodded grimly. "Heard about that? Sheriffs formed a posy, but those devils know the hills better than most." He hesitated, then asked, "You got family waiting for you in Portland?" Hannah shook her head slightly, then winced at the movement. "No, I was to be the new school teacher." Preston felt a strange tightness in his chest, alone in the world just like him. "Well, Miss Owens, first we need to get you well, then we can figure out the rest." The fever persisted through that day and the next. Preston made trips outside to hunt for fresh game, gather herbs he recognized from his mother's teachings, and tend a thunderbolt. Each time he returned, a part of him feared he'd find Hannah had slipped away in his absence, but her stubborn spirit kept her tethered to life. On the third day, Hannah's fever broke during the night. Preston awoke to find her watching him through clear eyes, a slight smile on her pale lips. "You stayed," she said simply. Preston shrugged, suddenly self-conscious of his rumpled appearance. "Couldn't very well leave you." Hannah attempted to sit up, this time with more success. "I owe you my life, Mr. Edwards." Preston, he corrected. "And you don't owe me anything. Any decent person would have done the same." Hannah's smile widened slightly. "We both know that's not true. There are precious few decent people left in this world." Preston felt his cheeks warm under her gaze. It had been a long time since he'd been looked at with such genuine gratitude. "How's the arm feeling?" Hannah glanced at the bandage. "Sore, but not burning anymore. Whatever you put on, it worked wonders. Old Indian remedy. Learned it from a Nez Perce healer when I first came west." Preston stood, stretching his tall frame. "You think you could manage some stew?" "Shot a rabbit yesterday." Hannah nodded, eagerly, suddenly aware of the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. "I think I could eat a whole deer." Preston's laugh was unexpected, rusty from disuse, but genuine. "Let's start with rabbit and see how that sits." As Hannah slowly regained her strength over the next few days, they fell into an unlikely routine. Preston would hunt or forage in the mornings, return to prepare meals, and spend afternoons repairing the homestead's worst damages: a leaking roof corner, a broken window, the rickety front step. Hannah began by simply sitting up, then standing, and eventually helping with small tasks. Her teacher's curiosity leading her to ask Preston endless questions about ranching, the territory, and survival in the West. "How long have you been out here?" Hannah asked on the fifth day, carefully peeling potatoes Preston had dug from what remained of the miller's garden. Preston paused from his work, repairing a chair. "Came west in '65 after the war. Worked cattle drives for 3 years before staking my claim." Hannah noted the shadow that crossed his features whenever he mentioned the past. And your ranch is a large operation? Modest 500 acres, about 200 head of cattle, employ 3 hands full-time. Pride crept into his voice despite his attempt at nonchalance. Built the main house myself. 2 stories, solid oak floors. Sounds lovely, Hannah said softly, noticing how Preston's shoulders straightened when he spoke of his accomplishment. It's nothing fancy, he said quickly, but it's mine paid for fair and square. He hesitated before adding, my wife helped design it before she passed. Hannah stilled her hands. I am sorry, didn't know. Preston nodded once sharply. Childbirth. 3 years ago, the baby too. He returned to his work, hammering with more force than necessary. Hannah respected his grief, letting silence fill the space between them. Eventually, she said, I lost my father. Last year. Different circumstances, but grief feels the same, I imagine. Preston's hammering slowed. Does it get easier? He asked without looking up. Not easier, Hannah replied thoughtfully. Just different. The sharp edges wear down, but the weight remains. Preston finally met her eyes. That's about the most honest answer I've ever heard on the matter. A connection formed in that moment, a recognition of shared understanding that needed no further words. By the 7th day, Hannah could walk around the homestead undead, though her strength tired quickly. The infection in her arm had subsided, leaving an angry red scar that would fade with time. I should try to make my way to Portland soon, Hannah said that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. They'll need to know what happened to the stage. Coach and I still have a position to fill. Preston nodded, though something in his expression tightened. Reckon so. You're well enough to travel, though you'd be wise not to push too hard first. He cleared his throat. My ranch is on the way. You could rest there a few days. Before continuing on, Hannah studied his profile, the strong jaw, and the hint of vulnerability around his eyes. I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Preston said quickly. It's the sensible thing. Plus, I've got books, a whole shelf of them. My mother's collection. Thought a school teacher might appreciate that. Hannah smiled at his transparent attempt to entice her. Well, when you put it that way, how could I refuse? The next morning they packed, what little. Hannah had her carpet bag, miraculously still intact after her flight from the stagecoach and Preston supplies. The abandoned homestead had served its purpose, a sanctuary in their time of need, but neither looked back as they rode away. Hannah seated in front of Preston on Thunderbolt. The journey took most of the day, with frequent stops to allow Hannah to rest. As the sun began its descent, a sprawling ranch came into view, a sturdy 2-story house set against the backdrop of rolling pastures dotted with cattle and bordered by pine forests. Welcome to the lazy Preston said, a note of pride in his voice. Hannah took in the well-maintained buildings, the corral holding horses of exceptional quality, the smoke rising invitingly from the chimney. It's beautiful, she said honestly. As they approached, a wiry older man emerged from the barn, followed by 2 younger cowboys. Boss was beginning to wonder if you'd been washed away in that storm. The older man called, then stopped short at the sight of Hannah. Hank, this is Miss Hannah Owens, Preston said formally as he helped Hannah down from the horse. She was on the stagecoach that was attacked. Miss Owens, this is Hank Miller, my foreman. Hank removed his hat, revealing a bald head fringed with gray hair. Madam, terrible business that. Attack. Glad to see you made it. The other cowboys introduced themselves as Joe and Liam, both regarding Hannah with undisguised curiosity. Female visitors to the lazy were rare, particularly ones who arrived sharing a horse with their normally reserved employer. Miss Owens needs rest, Preston said firmly. She'll be staying in the guest room for a few days before continuing to Portland. Hannah didn't miss the significant look that passed between Hank and the younger men, but Preston's hand at her elbow guided her toward the house before she could decipher its meaning. The interior of the ranch house surprised Hannah. She had expected bachelor simplicity, but instead found comfortable furnishings, colorful quilts, and shelves lined with books. A large fireplace dominated the main room, with a rocking chair placed invitingly nearby. "Your home is lovely," Hannah said, genuinely impressed. Preston's expression softened. "Sarah, my wife, had a talent for making a house. Feel like home. Haven't changed much since." His voice trailed off. Hannah nodded in understanding. "I'm sure she'd be pleased you've kept it this way." Preston showed her to the guest room, a simple but comfortable space with a patchwork quilt covering the bed and curtains framing a window overlooking the pastures. "Mrs. Jenkins comes in from town twice a week to clean and cook ahead for us," Preston explained. "She was here yesterday, so there's fresh linens and food in the kitchen. I'll have her prepare a bath for you when she comes tomorrow." Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past week. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Preston shifted uncomfortably. "No need for thanks. Just get your strength back." He hesitated at the door. "I'll bring up some supper in a while. You should rest now." Hannah slept deeply that night, more soundly than she had since leaving Philadelphia. The soft bed, the sense of security, and her improving health combined to grant her the first dreamless sleep in memory. The next few days established a new routine. Hannah would wake to breakfast, prepared by Preston, who proved surprisingly capable in the kitchen. She would spend mornings reading from his mother's book collection or sitting on the porch watching ranch operations. In the afternoons, Preston would often return to the house, ostensibly to check on her welfare, though their conversations gradually extended beyond polite inquiry into genuine interest. Hannah learned that Preston had grown up in Virginia, the son of a physician father and a mother who had instilled in him a love of literature. The war had taken his father and brother, driving Preston west to escape the painful memories. He had met Sarah during a cattle drive, courted her through letters, and married her within a year. In turn, Hannah shared her own story. Her childhood in Philadelphia, her father's descent into gambling after her mother's death, and her decision to seek independence in the West rather than accept a marriage proposal from a man who saw her primarily as a means to settle her father's debts. "You're braver than most men I know," Preston told her one evening as they sat on the porch swing, the ranch hands discreetly keeping their distance. "Coming all this way alone." Hannah smiled. "Not brave, desperate, perhaps." Preston shook his head. "There's a difference between running from something and running towards something better. You strike me as the latter." Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper, arrived as promised, a plump, cheerful widow who took one look at Hannah and declared her in need of proper feeding. She set about cooking enough food to put meat on those bones, all while regaling Hannah with local gossip and not so subtle inquiries about her relationship with Preston. "The whole town's been wondering when Mr. Edwards might take an interest again," Mrs. Jenkins said as she kneaded bread dough. "A man needs a wife, especially one with property to manage." Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "You misunderstand. Mr. Edwards rescued me. Nothing more. I'm continuing to Portland as soon as I'm fully recovered." Mrs. Jenkins gave her a knowing look. "Of course, dear, though I must say, in the 3 years since poor Sarah passed, I've never seen him bring anyone to stay at the ranch." She patted Hannah's hand with flour-covered fingers, just an observation. On her 10th day at the Lazy Hannah mentioned her intention to resume her journey to Portland. They were sitting in the parlor after dinner. Preston, reading from The Last of the Mohicans, allowed a nightly ritual they had begun when Hannah expressed her fondness for Cooper's novels. Preston's voice faltered mid-sentence. He closed the book, keeping his place with a finger. "You're still set on Portland, then?" Hannah nodded, though, with less certainty than she'd felt a week before. "The school board is expecting me. They've likely heard about the stagecoach attack by now and are wondering if I survived." "Of course." Preston reopened the book. "We could ride into town tomorrow, telegraph the school board to let them know you're safe and when to expect you." "That would be sensible," Hannah agreed, ignoring the hollow feeling in her chest. The next morning, they rode into the nearby town of Rivercrest, Preston on Thunderbolt and Hannah on a gentle mare named Daisy. The small settlement consisted of a main street with essential businesses, general store, telegraph office, saloon, small hotel, and a church under construction at the far end. As they tied their horses at the hitching post, Hannah became acutely aware of the curious stares directed their way. Preston nodded politely to several townspeople, his hand resting lightly at the small of Hannah's back as he guided her toward the telegraph office. Everyone staring, Hannah whispered. Preston's mouth quirked slightly. Small town. They're just curious about you, about me, or about us. Hannah asked before she could stop herself. Preston's steps faltered. Briefly. Probably both, he admitted. Inside the telegraph office, Hannah composed a message to the Portland School Board, informing them of her survival and her intention to arrive within the week. As the operator counted out the words, the door opened, admitting a well-dressed woman who stopped short at the sight of Preston. Preston Edwards, she said, her voice warm with familiarity. I wondered when we'd see you in town again. Preston straightened, removing his hat. Miss Rebecca, good to see you. The woman somewhere in her late 20s, with carefully styled blonde hair, turned her attention to Hannah, her smile never wavering, though her eyes sharpened with assessment. And who might this be? Hannah Owens, Preston said. She was on the stagecoach. That was attacked. Miss Owens, this is Rebecca Collins, the mayor's daughter. Hannah offered a polite smile. Pleased to meet you. Likewise, Rebecca replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. How fortunate you found such a capable rescuer. The tension in the small office grew palpable. Hannah sensed an unspoken history between Preston and this woman, confirmed when Rebecca turned back to him with a softer expression. Fathers, hosting a dinner tomorrow evening. Nothing formal, just a few friends. We'd be delighted if you join us. Her gaze slid briefly to Hannah. Both of you, of course. Preston shifted uncomfortably. Kind of you. But Miss Owens will be continuing her journey. Soon. Perhaps another time. Rebecca's smile tightened. Of course. Safe travels, Miss Owens. Preston, we miss seeing you at church. Do try to attend. This Sunday. After she departed, Hannah raised an eyebrow at Preston. Friend of yours. Preston settled his hat back on his head. Mayer's had his eye on me as a potential son-in-law since Sarah passed. Rebecca is obliging her father's wishes. And you're not interested? Hannah asked, trying to keep her tone casual as she paid for the telegraph. Preston guided her back onto the boardwalk. A man doesn't replace someone like Sarah easily. He paused, then added, more quietly, and a marriage should be built on more than convenience. They completed their errands in town, supplies from the general store, mail from the post office before stopping at the small cafe for lunch. Throughout the meal, Hannah noticed several towns. People entering specifically to greet Preston, their curious gazes lingering on her. You're quite popular, Hannah observed after an elderly woman had stopped to invite Preston to her grandson's wedding. Preston shrugged. Been here 8 years now. Folks know me. He hesitated, then added. Most of them mean, well, they worry about me being alone. And are you? Hannah asked. Lonely, I mean. Preston studied her face for a long moment. Wasn't aware I was. Until recently. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in thoughts. Neither quite dared to voice. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, Preston reined Thunderbolt to a stop. Hannah, he said, the use of her given name catching her attention. Immediately. I'm not one for flowery words, but I need to say something before you make your decision about Portland. Hannah's heart quickened. I'm listening. Preston removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. These past 2 weeks having you at the ranch, it's been, he faltered, then continued more firmly. I know we met under difficult circumstances, and you had plans before all this good plans. I respect that, but I find myself hoping you might consider alternatives. Hannah held her breath. What sort of alternatives? Preston said, simply not as a guest, as he took a deep breath. I'm not offering chair parity or convenience. I'm offering a partnership, a chance to build something together. Hannah stared at him, searching his face. Preston, we hardly know each other. I know enough, he replied. I know you're brave and resilient. I know you face challenges heed-in instead of running from them. I know you're educated and thoughtful. His voice softened, and I know that for the first time since Sarah died, I'm thinking about the future instead of the past. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything now, Preston assured her. The school in Portland isn't going anywhere. Take some time. Consider what I'm offering. Hannah nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. They continued down the hill, the ranch house growing larger before them. No longer just a temporary shelter, but a place that had almost imperceptibly begun to feel like home. That evening, Hannah wrote a second telegraph to be sent the following day, requesting the Portland School Board grant her 2 additional weeks before making her final decision about the position. As she sealed the envelope, a knock came at her bedroom door. Come in, she called, expecting Preston. Instead, Hank the foreman stood, awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. Beg pardon, Miss Owens was hoping for a word. Hannah gestured to the chair by the window. Of course, Mr. Miller. Hank remained standing. It's not my place to interfere, but I've known Preston since he first came west. Wet behind the ears and determined to prove himself. Hannah waited, sensing the man had more to say. When Sarah died, something in him died, too. Threw himself into work, barely spoke for months. Hank twisted his hat in his hands. Until you showed up, I'd never seen him read those books again. They were Sarah's favorite. Hannah swallowed against the tightness in her throat. Mr. Miller, I'm not saying this to burden you, Hank interrupted gently. Just wanted you to know that whatever you decide, you've already done good here. Brought something back to life in him. He nodded once firmly. That's all. Good night, Miss Owens. After Hank left, Hannah sat long into the night, watching the moonlight cast shadows across the ranch yard, weighing dreams she'd carried east against new possibilities she'd never imagined. The next morning, Hannah found Preston in the barn, brushing down Thunderbolt. He looked up at her approach, his expression careful, guarded. I've been thinking about your offer, Hannah said without preamble. Preston set down the brush, giving her his full attention. And I came west to build a new life, too. Be independent, to make my own choices. Hannah took a step closer. The teaching position in Portland would give me that. Preston's shoulders stiffened, but he nodded. I understand. But Hannah continued, I'm beginning to think independence isn't about being alone. It's about choosing who to build a life with. She met his gaze directly. I don't want charity or convenience either, Preston. If I stay, it would be because I choose to, because I see something worth building here. Hope flickered across Preston's features. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like those 2 weeks to get to know you properly, to see if what I'm feeling is real or just gratitude for your kindness. Hannah offered a small smile and to give you time to be certain as well. Preston closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. I'm already certain, Hannah, but I can wait for you to be sure, too. The next 2 weeks transformed the lazy E. Hannah's presence brought life back to corners of the ranch that had lain dormant since Sarah's death. She organized the long-neglected library, planted flowers along the front walkway, and even began teaching Liam, the youngest ranch hand, to read during evening lessons that soon included the other men as well. Preston found reasons to remain closer to the house, fixing the porch railing that had tilted for years, building new shelves for the kitchen, ensuring the piano in the parlor was finally tuned. In the evenings, he would sometimes play simple melodies his mother had taught him, while Hannah sang in a clear, sweet soprano that drew the ranch hands to linger near open windows. They rode the property together, Preston pointing out boundaries and sharing his plans for expansion. Hannah offered suggestions about rotating pastures based on books she'd read, impressing Preston with her quick understanding of ranching principles. You'd make a fine rancher's wife, he told her one afternoon as they picnicked beside the creek that cut through the northern section of the property. Hannah smiled. Is that a proposal, Mr. Edwards? Preston leaned back against a Tree trunk. Would you accept if it was? Instead of answering, Hannah moved to sit beside him, her shoulder touching his. My father always said I was too headstrong for my own good. Your father was wrong, Preston said firmly. Your strength is exactly what makes you. He hesitated, then finished softly. What makes you perfect? Hannah turned to look at him, finding his face inches from hers. No one is perfect, Preston. Perfect for me, then, he amended and closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Hannah responded, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek, the kiss deepened into something more certain, a promise, a beginning. When they finally drew apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Hannah Owens. I know it's fast and probably foolish, but I do. Hannah's smile was radiant. Then we're both fools because I love you too. Their courtship became official news in Rivercrest the following Sunday when they attended church together. Rebecca Collins' tight smile and her father's disappointed frown were overshadowed by the genuine congratulations from most townsfolk, many of whom had worried about poor Mr. Edwards for years. Mrs. Jenkins was perhaps the most pleased, immediately taking Hannah under her wing to share household secrets specific to the lazy E. The root cellar floods if we get more than 3 days of rain, she warned, and the chimney in the main bedroom needs sweeping twice a season or it smokes something terrible. Hannah absorbed it all increasingly. Certain of her decision, she sent a final telegraph to Portland declining the teaching position with sincere regret. The reply came 2 days later. Disappointment coupled with understanding and a suggestion that she might consider teaching in Rivercrest, which had been without a proper school teacher for nearly a year. Would you mind? Hannah asked Preston when she shared the news. If I taught in town, Preston laughed. Mind? I think it's perfect you'd be sharing your gifts without having to choose between teaching and. He stopped suddenly, self-conscious, and being your wife, Hannah finished for him. Is that what you're trying to ask me? Preston Edwards. Color rose in Preston's cheeks. I had a speech prepared and a ring. My mother's. It's being sized in town. Hannah laughed, the sound bright and joyful. When you have both ready, I promise to act surprised. The proposal came the following evening. Preston had arranged for Hannah to visit Mrs. Jenkins in town, ostensibly to discuss wedding preparations, a pretense Hannah saw it through but played along with willingly. When she returned to the ranch, she found the house transformed. Lanterns lined the path to the porch, their soft glow complemented by wild flowers gathered from the meadows. The table was set for dinner, complete, with Preston's mother's china that hadn't been used in years. Preston waited on the porch, dressed in his best clothes, his usually confident expression replaced by nervous anticipation. You did all this while I was gone? Hannah asked, taking in the scene. Preston nodded. Had help. The boys aren't just good with cattle. Dinner was Preston's best attempt at a fine meal venison he'd hunted himself. Vegetables from the garden Hannah had started in a somewhat lopsided cake that made Hannah's heart swell with affection. When the meal was finished, Preston led Hannah to the porch swing where they had spent so many evenings talking. The ranch was quiet, the hands conspicuously absent, giving them privacy under the vast blanket of stars. When I found you in that homestead, Preston began, his voice low and earnest, I thought I was saving your life. Didn't realize you'd end up saving mine in return. Hannah squeezed his hand. We saved each other. Preston reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Hannah Owens, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need a home or I need a housekeeper, but because I love you and can't imagine my future without you in it. The ring. Inside the box was a delicate gold band set with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Elegant, understated. Perfect. Yes, Hannah whispered as Preston slipped it onto her finger. With all my heart. Yes. Their wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the newly completed church in Rivercrest. Hannah wore a dress of ivory satin, ordered from Portland with lace that Mrs. Jenkins declared fine enough for a queen. Preston stood tall in a new black suit, his usual weathered confidence, momentarily replaced by wonder as Hannah walked toward him on Hank's arm. The entire town attended along with several of Hannah's former traveling companions who had survived the stagecoach attack and been delighted to discover her not only alive but marrying into one of the Torito's most promising ranches. "You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Preston whispered as they stood before the preacher. Hannah's smile was radiant. "And you, Mr. Edwards, are the most handsome groom." Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to cherish and support each other through whatever challenges life presented. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was both tender and possessive a statement to everyone present that this remarkable woman had chosen him, and he would spend his life being worthy of that choice. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the couple who had found each other under the most unlikely circumstances. As the evening waned, Preston led Hannah away from the festivities, helping her into the wagon decorated with flowers and ribbons by the ranch hands. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Edwards?" Preston asked, the new name sending a thrill through Hannah. "More than ready," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as they drove under the star-filled sky. Life settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Hannah began teaching at the River S School 3 days a week, quickly earning the respect of both students and parents with her combination of firm expectations and genuine warmth. The other days, she worked alongside Preston on the ranch, learning every aspect of the operation while adding her own touches to the home they now fully shared. 6 months after their wedding, Hannah discovered she was expecting. The news brought both joy and anxiety. Preston's fear for her safety tempered by Hannah's steady confidence. "This baby will have both of us," she assured him, understanding the shadows of his past. "We're stronger together, remember?" As Hannah's pregnancy progressed, Preston became increasingly protective, insisting on accompanying her to and from the schoolhouse and arranging for Mrs. Jenkins to stay at the ranch full-time during the final months. Hannah accepted his concern with grace, knowing it stemmed from love rather than doubt in her capabilities. On a crisp autumn evening, exactly 1 year after Preston had found Hannah in the abandoned homestead, their son was born, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined expression. They named him Matthew after Preston's father, with Thomas as a middle name to honor Hannah's. Preston held his son with trembling hands, his face a mixture of awe and lingering fear until the doctor confirmed both mother and child were doing remarkably well. "You did it," he whispered to Hannah, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "We did it," she corrected, making room for him to sit beside her. "And we'll keep doing it together." As the years passed, the Lazy prospered under their joint stewardship. Hannah's education and Preston's practical experience proved a powerful combination. They added a second child 2 years later, a daughter named Sarah Elizabeth, whose arrival finally helped Preston fully heal from his first wife's loss. Hannah continued teaching, eventually overseeing the construction of a proper schoolhouse in Rivercrest, funded in part by the Edwards' increasing prosperity. Preston expanded the ranch to over 1,000 acres, his cattle known throughout the territory for their quality. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch swing, watching their children play in a yard that now featured a swing set Preston had built and flower gardens Hannah had designed. Sometimes they would reminisce about their unlikely beginning of fever-stricken woman and the cowboy who couldn't leave her to face death alone. "You ever regret not going to Portland?" Preston asked once as they watched their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long familiarity. "Not for a single moment. This is where I was always meant to be." "How can you be so sure?" Preston's voice held a hint of the insecurity that occasionally still surfaced, the fear that he'd somehow diverted her from a greater destiny. Hannah turned his face toward hers, the years having only deepened her love for her. This man who had saved her in more ways than one. Because love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about building the right life together. She kissed him softly. And this life we've built, it's better than any dream I had before I met you. As twilight settled over the lazy Preston Edwards held his wife close, grateful for the fever that had led him to an abandoned homestead on a stormy night so many years before. What had begun as an act of basic human decency had blossomed into a love that defined them both, a love born of compassion, strengthened by shared purpose, and destined to last all their days. The fever that had nearly claimed Hannah's life had instead given her everything she'd never known to wish for: a true partner, a meaningful purpose, and a love story that would be told in Rivercrest for generations to come.